Yeah, I guess that we could say that not everyone would like to grow and change all the time. There are some of the people who would really like to do what they're doing in precision and going to the same subject to the depth through the years,
Absolutely.
and they're good at that, and they're
And
doing
that's still
well,
needed. Yeah.
and they're needed for the core business. And in order to do something really well, it needs like experience and time and operational excellence. And it's not that it's not needed, but in some cases, maybe more and more cases, we need additional capabilities that needs to be in a person. So what do you think is the best tip you could have for someone who wants to create change, like change makers or leaders, innovation leaders? How could they really start doing what they're doing?
Yeah, exactly. How to not only survive but actually thrive being an entrepreneur and a change maker. And based on the many years that I worked with this, and all the obstacles I've faced and all the difficulties and challenges, I've sort of identified a number of principles, if you will, or habits that strong entrepreneurs possess. And I've created a framework that I call the top 5 principles of high impact entrepreneurs. And of course there are many things, but these seems to be some of the most critical. And the first one is actually to understand and anticipate and accept the resistance that there will be, because many times I've seen entrepreneurs burn out too quick because they took that resistance personally, and they sort of got surprised by it and overwhelmed by it. So if you can mentally prepare yourself by saying, like you are going on a mission as a Navy SEAL, naturally there's going to be resistance, right? That's the name of the game. But the job here is to then disarm this resistance, not like a Navy SEAL, obviously, but as a human being with empathy towards where is this resistance coming from? How can we help people understand this journey that we are on? How can we tell better stories that makes people understand not only where we are going, but also their role, their potential role in this, and how that's still critical, and how they are very much invited to be part of this journey. So that's the step one in like managing the resistance, by starting by anticipating and understanding it. The second one is then to understand the rules in the organization, both the formal ones, obviously, but especially also the informal rules, which are often based on the history of the company, things that happened in the past that now has sort of set strong strong ways of how we're doing things that is part of the culture, but also all the templates and the ways of working, understanding why was this built in the first place, how has this been guiding and helping the company for many years, and how can we still leverage some of that in the future where we are going. So it's quite clear that we are building this on top of things that worked, but then at the same time being able to tell clear stories about some of those rules that might need to change, that we might need to adopt into a new way of doing things. Examples would be like the legal contracts that the company have. Why does that need to change if we are contracting with a small startup? Because they're going to get crushed by the governance of the existing contracts, and how to source things in the future as a procurement department, or the business modeling we need from our finance department, etc. So understanding these rules will help you then have conversations with the people that you will have to be part of the journey that needs to change the way of working, the way of operating. And in a way, you need to sort of, at Lego, we called ourselves Lego brand fundamentalists. Like we would know more about the legacy, the history of the company than anyone else, because we knew that was very important for us to tell the right stories, and to make sure we also showed the necessary respect towards the past, realizing that we are standing on the shoulders of giants as we're looking into the future, and it is the current business paying our salaries, right? So even though we're exploring the future business, we show a deep respect for the current one and for the past. And so that's the second point. And then to the third point, which is about how do you create fellowship? How do you build tribes around what you're doing? Because you cannot just do your innovation in isolation. And it's very tempting to just keep it under the radar, all the time through. and then only at the end come and say, ta-da, see what we made. And unfortunately, that often ends with that nobody loves it. Nobody wants
Yeah,
it because
of
they were
course.
not invited on board. They were not mentally prepared. They have not been on the journey that you maybe spend years on, and therefore it does not compute with the existing system. So how do you invite people in? Building tribes, creating fellowship. And this is really about transparency, creating as much transparency as possible about what's going on. What are we doing? What could be your role? Inviting people in. And it demands an investment in both time and resource to make sure that this happens. And it's also
Yeah,
sometimes that for an entrepreneur, it feels like, that's a waste of time. Why do we need to invest in informing all these people or getting up, on the stage and speaking to everybody about what you're doing?
yeah.
But this
And
is
of course,
really,
it's
really key.
connected
Yeah.
to number one, because when you're transparent and people see it, then you get the resistance. If they don't know, they don't resist it, right?
Exactly.
So
The more people are exposed to something new, the more likely they will lean positively in towards it. And over time
mhm.
is what you see, people are starting to then reflect on their own, having their own ideas. And before you know it, people are starting to take ownership on these things and becoming part of it. So, one of the things we did at Lego was introducing demo days every 2 weeks in our lab. And the reason for this was not so much to get the input from people that would come, down to the demo days and see the demos. That was also great. But more importantly, it was to over time slowly, make people's mindset and attitudes become more positive towards what we were doing. And eventually they will start feeling with pride from the things that they were seeing because, hey, I can actually use this in my area. And that's really what you want. So as much transparency and openness, how can you invite people in?
Yeah.
So that's the third one. And then moving to the fourth one, which is quite funny because, as we are saying at Diplomatic Rebels, we're saying this is about writing love letters. And we mean it quite literally because it is about being very humble and kind when you're reaching out to people that you need a favor from, people that you need to somehow be part of this or get permission to move forward with. How can you be very proactive in reaching out to them way before a conflict arises, right? So this is also about analyzing the organization and saying, where might the resistance come from? Who are the people that we need the most? Let's proactively reach out, spend time with them, making sure that they understand why this is important and what role they could play to become part of this future. So it is to be really sort of humble and kind and have empathy towards the
Yeah.
people that may not initially understand, instead of just rejecting them and say, well, they're all idiots, as I know some entrepreneurs might have a tendency towards. Then rather say, okay, now this is our primary objective. How do we make this group of people, this department, this area really understand and start loving the things that we're doing?
Yeah. That's a hard one.
Yeah, it is, but actually, it's the easy part about that one is to get started because most people will know that, well, I could probably reach a little more out to these people. I could probably try to spend a little more time with these people to make them understand what's happening. So actually, one thing concretely we did at Lego, and initially, when you're working with innovation, there's typically a number of departments that you're always in conflict with. And it's all those that are sort of keeping the status quo and, making sure that everybody is in compliance. So that would be, legal department, procurement, finance, and maybe sort of quality assurance. Those type of departments where you will often be challenging with because you're changing the template, you're not following all the rules. So what we did, instead of fighting them constantly, we invited them in. We created actually hot disks in our lab and say, here's a hot disk for finance, for legal, for procurement, etc. Why don't you come and work here once in a while and hot disk with us? And initially, it was only the junior people coming in because they thought it was cool hanging out with these innovation guys. But they would then go back to their departments, and over lunch, they would be talking about some of the cool things that were going on, some of the interesting things that we were able to share with them. And eventually, the senior people came because they figured out that if they spend a little time there, they would be more in the know. When they were reporting up in the system, they were actually being in the know about, well, there's some interesting things going on here, and we're exploring these technologies. And people generally want to be in the know, right? They don't want to be left out. So if they have an opportunity to be informed, to be knowledgeable, they'll take it. And eventually, actually, what happened was that these departments opened up their small innovation outfits, discussing, what's the future of legal contracting? What's the future of sourcing? What's the future of business modeling? So that they started innovating along with us. And from being, these enemies we were fighting, they became some of our closest allies in figuring out future ways of making sure that there were compliance and governance and